The end of the Super Bowl marks the end of the 2024 fall football season, and if you're a true college football sicko like me, you are already looking ahead to next season, 2025 in college football, week 1, and let me tell you, it is absolutely loaded. If you haven't had a chance to look at this slate, please go look at it right now. Look at all these beautiful games. Every FBS versus FBS week 1 game on your screen right now. The one exception that's not on here is Wyoming at Akron. I just didn't have enough room to fit them on here, and that was one of the lower tier games. No disrespect to either of those two teams, but it's a slate to get pretty excited about. This isn't to completely slander week 0, which I'll give a special shout out to. There's still 4 games on week 0 a week earlier, but it's not enough to justify an entire video about just those 4 games. So in this video, we're going to talk about the week 1 games because this is a loaded slate compared to the last couple of seasons we've gotten in week 1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take all these games and we're going to separate them into tiers based off of how hype these games are going to be. So if you've been around here for a while, you know how we like to do it, and that's with arbitrary tier list names. And we're going to take a look at these right now. We've got appointment television at the very top. Pretty self-explanatory. It's going to be games that are must-watch TV, appointment television. You've got to set aside time to make sure you're going to be ready to watch that game. Just below that, we have marquee matchups, other ones that are going to be big games, but maybe not quite one that you're literally setting aside time to make sure you catch. Then there's consequential games, games that maybe don't quite reach that level of hype, but still are solid matchups that have consequences. Below that, we have intriguing, where maybe on paper there's something there that would make you tune into that game, track the score, see if it's close. Then there's likely one-sided games that are going to be projected to be blowouts, and most likely will be. And then at the bottom tier, we have games that are not very exciting, which in some cases, those will be because they are one-sided and there's just less intrigue about it overall. But without further ado, let's get into this list. We'll start at the bottom tier with the not exciting games, which is going to give us 7 matchups here, starting with Wyoming at Akron, which was the dishonorable mention earlier, the one that didn't fit on the graphic. You probably expected it to be in this tier. It's just low-level football overall. Wyoming and Akron both did win a few games towards the end of the season, but they still both project to be among the worst in the entire FBS. Central Michigan at San Jose State is a similar boat. San Jose State, however, obviously much better team. I just expect this one to probably be one-sided on top of the overall level play, not being too high of a level, but it does highlight a good story in Kenny Matalolo's quick turnaround of the Spartans. We've got UTEP at Utah State, which is probably at the higher end of this tier, just because I could see Scotty Walden's team coming out with an edge this season, and I could see Bronco Mendenhall with another quick turnaround for Utah State, but they're both likely to be rebuilding in this season. Ball State at Purdue is an in-state matchup, but Purdue's not very good, and Ball State is somehow significantly worse. So Purdue will probably blow them out of the water. Temple at UMass, another one where regionally it's fun, but again, not a game where I'm expecting anything too crazy. They're both breaking in first-year head coaches there. Nevada goes on the road to play Penn State. They showed some fun things last season, but such a talent disparity, not a ton of regional relevance here. I expect Penn State to blow them out. And then Marshall, Georgia, similar boat. Obviously, Marshall got just shredded in the transfer portal, and now they have to go on the road to play Georgia. Like, it's obviously going to be extremely one-sided. So not too much to be excited about in either of those two games between a school that's probably going to get squashed and a big brand. But we get past the not exciting tier, which is typically pretty long that time of the year, and we get to the likely one-sided tier, which is going to be games that are just most likely going to be a blowout just because of the nature of the matchup. You've got Old Dominion and Indiana. We expect Indiana to once again be pretty good. Maybe not quite as good as last season, but still really good. Old Dominion does sometimes get up for these non-conference games and play well against tough opponents, so maybe they do that here, and maybe they make it interesting. New Mexico at Michigan is some intrigue to it. It's going to be Jason Eck's first game as a head coach at New Mexico, but I still think Michigan's going to take care of business there. Colorado State at Washington is another case where, Jay Norvell has done some really good stuff, but still, the talent gap is going to be pretty big there, and Washington should take care of business. Year 2 Jed Fish, I'm expecting a big leap from them. Georgia State at Ole Miss, another similar conversation. Ole Miss should dominate that game. FAU, I should say, is really bad. Maryland wasn't great this last season, but I expect a bounce back year, and FAU was just so terrible that I would expect a pretty easy Maryland win. Western Michigan and Michigan State is one of those interstate matchups that I like. but not too much with Western Michigan to think that they'll be able to compete with Michigan State. However, there was some good stuff from them this last season. Ohio at Rutgers is another one on here. I love Greg Schiano and company. Ohio would have been more intriguing of a team if Tim Albin didn't leave. There's going to be some pieces missing there, and the defending MAC champions likely to get blown out at Rutgers. And then Missouri State, it's their first game as an FBS team, which is really exciting, but they're most likely going to get flattened by USC in that game on the road. So just games that have maybe a little bit more intrigue than the bottom tier here, but are most likely going to be one-sided, which removes some of that intrigue. And I use the word intrigue a lot, which is perfect for this next tier, which is intriguing. And this is going to be a bunch of games that have just a little bit more flair than maybe any of the games that were a tier below it. Buffalo at Minnesota. It's a couple of teams that finished with a bunch of wins last season. Buffalo winning 9 games in Pete Lembo's first season. They're still probably outmatched versus Minnesota, but it's an interesting game. We'll see if they can make something happen. Northwestern goes on the road to play Tulane, which I love whenever a group of 5 school gets to host a power conference team. It's a big game for Northwestern and David Braun at the helm at head coach, where they probably need to get that one done in Tulane with an opportunity for a staple power conference win. UNLV goes on the road to play Sam Houston. Sam Houston coming off of a 10-win season. Yes, they lose Casey Keeler, but they're trying to prove they're not going anywhere against one of the group of 5's finest, UNLV, who also lost their head coach and is replacing with Dan Mullen. We've got a neutral site game in Charlotte between App State and Charlotte, which I think it's interesting playing that at a neutral site. I don't necessarily love that, but still an intriguing matchup there between a couple of teams that are hoping for a bounce-back season. We've got Eastern Michigan on the road at Texas State, where both teams that would hope to contend in their respective conferences. I do think Texas State would be favored by a substantial margin in that game, though. I like Hawaii going at Arizona. That's going to be an interesting game and probably a must-win game for Brent Brennan at Arizona because of how things went last season. Toledo at Kentucky is interesting simply because Toledo went on the road to play Mississippi State last year and blew them out. How are they going to perform against Kentucky? And if they do pull off a crazy upset, are we going to be hearing some buzz about Bob Stoops and the hot seat? Maybe. Mississippi State at Southern Miss, another one that just melts my heart. I love these interstate matchups, and I love a group of 5 team hosting a power conference team, and seeing that again on there is awesome. I think Southern Miss and Charles Huff could have an opportunity to pull a hilarious upset there. Rice at Louisiana has some intrigue. If we see Rice show up and turn in a good team here, maybe we could see them get something done, but it's probably going to be Louisiana favored by quite a bit. We've got Jacksonville State at UCF, which is going to be year 1 Scott Frost hosting the defending Conference USA champions in Jacksonville State. However, Jacksonville State, obviously without Rich Rodriguez, they're going to be having a lot of new they're experiencing as well. And then finally, Miami of Ohio at Wisconsin. Miami of Ohio, contrary to some of those other MAC schools, they kept their coach. They kept a lot of their guys. And so going on the road to play Luke Fickell in Wisconsin, there's a level of intrigue to that game as well. And that's why they're in the intriguing tier right here. And that's why I'm looking forward to all of those games. And we haven't even gotten to any of the top 3 tiers yet. And we've talked about some solid games here, but let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this slate and what gets me so excited about week 1 of next season. So the next tier is consequential games. Games that are going to have big consequences either in a playoff race or a conference title race or maybe in bragging rights. And it starts with East Carolina at NC State. East Carolina just beat NC State in a bowl game, and the Wolfpack are going to have to listen all offseason about how East Carolina is their big brother now. They just got a huge win over them, and they're going to have to get annoyed by that and then step it up for this game and a chance to prove, yeah, that was a fluke. It was a bowl game where our guys are opting out and they can squash their little brother again, but there's going to be a lot of passion in that game. It's going to be a great rivalry game. We've got Cal at Oregon State and Utah at UCLA, both a couple of matchups of old Pac-12 foes, finally getting the band back together and playing these games in week 1. I'm super excited for both of those games, and I'm excited to see how many Utah fans end up packing it in the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Some really fun matchups there. Coastal Carolina at Virginia, another interstate matchup that I love, and the Cavaliers have had some issues with teams in the state of Virginia in the past, just as Virginia Tech has. These lower tier schools always somehow seem to get a little bit extra out of these games and seem to really step up to the plate, especially Coastal Carolina in these types of games. They gave Virginia quite a scare a couple of years ago. Boise State at South Florida is a huge group of 5 matchup. I am super excited. The consequential nature of this will be in the group of 5 playoff race because South Florida and Boise State will both expect to factor into that. UTSA, Texas A&M, probably at the lower end of this tier, but I think it's consequential because I think UTSA is going to have a bounce-back season. Texas A&M will be supremely talented. They'll be favored by a lot in this game and expected to win, but UTSA packs a mighty punch when they are at peak efficiency under Jeff Traylor, and I would expect them to have that punch against Texas A&M. So they can't sleepwalk into this game, and it would be very consequential to lose to a team like this in terms of the bragging rights that would occur. And then we got Georgia Southern at Fresno State, kind of like a lower tier Boise State South Florida matchup in terms of group of 5 impact and what that could do to the race down the stretch of the season. We've got Nebraska versus Cincinnati at a neutral site, which is another one that I really like, and I think that's a very unique, fun matchup between a couple of passionate fan bases, and that's just one that I really think will be an interesting game, and it's going to be consequential for both of these head coaches that are looking for a really big year 3 to sort of continue to build on the foundations that they've laid. It could set the tone for their seasons. So this takes us to our second to last tier, which is going to be the marquee matchups. And now we're getting to some of these cream of the crop matchups that are just so exciting. And it's going to start with Auburn at Baylor, a couple of teams that are getting a ton of hype for next season. And Auburn has to go into Baylor's building. They've got to earn all of this preseason hype that they've been getting on the road versus a team that really had more momentum than most teams in the country at the end of the season last year. They won 6 games in a row to end the regular season. You've got Alabama going on the road to play Florida State. Think of all the storylines that would emerge if the Noles pulled out a win here. And even if Bama blows out Florida State, is Mike Norvell that firmly on the hot seat? How big will the concerns get if they lose that game? And how big will the concerns get for DeBoer if Florida State pulls off the win? How do you even read that game? That is what gets me so excited for that one. TCU in North Carolina, it's going to be Bill Belichick's debut as a North Carolina head coach against TCU, who just always seems to find themselves wrapped up in these big storylines. I think back to when they were playing Colorado for Coach Prime's first game. We've got Tennessee versus Syracuse at a neutral site. I really wish this game was at one of the home venues, and that goes for the one after this that's also at a neutral site as well, but still an exciting matchup. Tennessee and Syracuse both won double-digit games last season. Tennessee was obviously in the playoffs, and I think it's a huge matchup between a team in Tennessee that people are already high on, and then in Syracuse, maybe a team that people are sleeping on right now. South Carolina versus Virginia Tech, another one. South Carolina is going to have all the expectations, all the hype around them, and Virginia Tech's going to be a team that didn't have that, or probably won't have that this season, but had to deal with that last season and then kind of flopped down the stretch, didn't have the season they thought. Maybe Virginia Tech was a team we were a year early on. Let's find out, and we'll see in that game. Another one I'm excited for that I wish was not a neutral site game. But that takes us to the best of the best, the top tier, and that is appointment television. You better make sure you are on your couch, firmly planted in front of that TV, unless you're at one of these games. For these games, we got Texas at Ohio State. It is a rematch of the national semifinal from this last season, and one I am just stoked to see. It's going to be on the road against Ohio State, the team that's replacing Moore, and it's going to be Arch Manning's first start as a Longhorn. Just a crazy game I'm so excited to see. We've got Notre Dame going on the road to play Miami. It's Catholics versus convicts at Hard Rock. I have no doubt Miami's going to have that place rocking. I have no doubt it's going to deliver. I'm so excited to see that. Playing a Mario Cristobal team early in the non-conference is terrifying because he performs best in those games, especially at Miami, and the Fighting Irish going to have a tough task fresh off of their national runner-up finish. And then we've got LSU at Clemson, which another one. My goodness, Tigers v. Tigers, Death Valley v. Death Valley. I mean, this is just an awesome game, and Clemson is probably going to be once again a contender, if not the ACC champion. So a great measuring stick for LSU against the ACC champions and a chance to build their resume. Brian Kelly has really struggled in the non-conference in big games at LSU, and LSU as a program has struggled in these types of games. They've got to deliver against Clemson. And then finally, we got Georgia Tech at Colorado. The Buffaloes and Coach Prime, their first year without Travis Hunter, their first year without Shador. How will they perform against one of the trendiest teams in college football in Georgia Tech? I think the storylines in that game are awesome, and I think the contrast between the culture of Georgia Tech football and Colorado football is sick. It's the exact thing I look for. It is peak television. It is appointment television, and that's why it's in the top tier. But that does it for this list. That is every week 1 FBS versus FBS matchup put into different tiers based on how hyped I am for those games. We're still quite a ways away from these games actually being played, but let me know down in the comments, which of these are you most excited for? Which of these would you like to go to? And which of them are you going to? Maybe you've already got a ticket booked and you're excited for one of these kickoff matchups in week 1. Either way, let me know down in the comments, and I've got more content coming for you guys throughout this whole week. We are not stopping talking about college football just because it's the offseason. We're just getting started, and that's all I got for you guys in this video. I will see you guys later this week.